Roxy. Got the house now. We gon' turn it up.
AEW Unrestricted. Aubrey Edwards, Will Washington, welcome to the official podcast of All Elite Wrestling. We've got new episodes every Thursday, and you are here. You are listening to an exclusive interview with awesome AEW people. This is a really fun show, and sometimes we get to talk about fun backstage stuff. And before we recorded this intro, I was like, hey, Will, what are we going to talk about? But there was actually a funny story that happened on the day of Shelton Benjamin's debut that, Will, you didn't hear about this. So,
no, I haven't heard about this at all. That was at the Dynamite 5-year anniversary.
It was a 5-year anniversary in Pittsburgh.
Which is funny because that was my segment. So that's why I'm like really curious how this, what happened.
It has nothing to do with this segment. It's completely after the show. So we do like 4 Ring of Honor matches before. We do Dynamite. We do Rampage. And then we have another Ring of Honor match after. So it is a very long day. And by the time that I'm getting on the bus, it is 12:30 at night. And I was in the last match, so I'm one of the last people in the building, right? I'm sitting on the bus, and security's doing the sweep, trying to get everybody that might be hanging out, like, because this is the last bus, and it's a good 20-minute drive from the venue to the hotel. It's going to be hard for anyone to get an Uber. Like, let's just make sure we get everybody. And we're sitting there, and that bus had been already sitting there for 20 minutes before I showed up. And we're sitting there, we're waiting a good 15 minutes, whatever. And then Shelton Benjamin stands up and goes, wait, I forgot a shoe, and then runs off the bus. And we're just like, it is your first freaking day. What is happening right now? He's like, I'll be right back. He leaves. This dude takes 15 minutes to find not a pair of sneakers, a single sneaker that he had left in the dressing room. And he comes back on and we're like, welcome to AEW, bitch. Like, what the hell? So we did not get back to the hotel until after 1 a.m. So what a first day. How to make an impression. The Shelton Benjamin way.
But, of course, yeah, we just talked about the 5-year anniversary of AEW Dynamite. 5 years. Congratulations.
Congratulations.
Yeah, like, honestly, I think it's to get to do that show right off the heels of celebrating our brand new TV deal. It was just such a great time. And that week in particular was such a cool celebration of all things AEW. And I think this is the perfect show to kind of encapsulate that, because our guest today has been a part of so much AEW history and has really been the voice of all of that. And I'm really excited to have him here on this show. Aubrey, who's our guest today?
Today's guest is one of the, I was going to say day one peeps, but technically like before day one. I am very happy to have Excalibur back on the podcast. And it's been since early pandemic. I think we had figured out you had been on here. So welcome back, sir.
Yeah, thank you very much. I like to refer to myself as a day 1.5 guy. Whereas, the Bucks, Hangman, Kenny, all those guys are day 1 guys. And I was there at the ticket on sale thing at the MGM in February. So that's kind of like day 1.5. So
I'll count it. We'll count it.
Yeah. So, I mean, I was there. It's been with the company for a long time. It's been really a rewarding last couple weeks. Just to see where things have gotten, over, 5+ years. So yeah, it's really cool. And thank you guys for having me back.
Well, speaking
also
of 5+
on that
years,
note, I think you were actually going to say the same thing.
Yes, I think we were on the same page as far as we were going. I'm like, speaking of 5+ years, Dynamite just celebrated.
Then you just fucking take care of it. Yeah, whatever.
Dynamite just celebrated 5 years, and you have, of course, been really the voice of AEW Dynamite. I think you've really, it's only like a handful of shows you haven't been on. I'm pretty certain it's maybe like 5 or 6, if I'm not mistaken.
That sounds about right. Yeah.
Yeah. And, but ultimately over 250 plus episodes, that's a huge accomplishment. Congratulations on that. So I want to talk about your favorite stories of being a part of live television, because you and I have had that conversation before about the fact that live TV was something that you kind of got thrown into.
Yeah, it was before Dynamite began, the only televised live, like cable television or network television, any experience I had was the original All In pre-show, and that was on WGN. which I guess is on most cable networks. I mean, maybe, I don't know, even know if WGN still exists, but
they're News Nation now.
Okay. Well, so I was on what I guess is now News Nation, but the first experience, the first time I'd had any sort of inkling of doing anything live was that. And I remember in the moment they cut to me to, talk about the card coming up on pay-per-view. And I hear this voice just start beginning to speak in my head while I'm speaking. I just freeze because I've never experienced this before. And I kind of freaked out, but then I got my bearings and I kept going. And Keith Mitchell, who was the director that day, he in his laconic, very steadying manner of speaking, he's like, "Hey, buddy, just know if I'm ever talking while you're talking, I ain't talking to you." And I was like, "Oh, that's actually very helpful." And from that point out, I've somehow just been able to cancel out all the noise, cancel out, for the most part, anything that's going on in my headset, and just really be able to get my thoughts across. And so that was, my first live TV lesson, but I would say it's my most important live TV lesson.
Yeah, geez. It's one of those things that I don't think people realize how many voices each individual person is listening to while they're doing something else on television. It's very much a rub your stomach, pat yourself on the head type thing where you're just really trying to focus on the job that you're there to do, but also all of this other information is coming in. Do you need to pay attention to it? Because, maybe there is someone who's not Keith Mitchell telling you something that you absolutely do need to know in that given moment. So it's a skill that a lot of people don't have. But from my perspective, it's a skill that you guys have, just perfected at this point, because I have no idea when you guys miss a beat. You and your whole team is freaking incredible. And I'm so happy that people who are new to wrestling, they're hearing you and you're sort of the voice of wrestling for them, which is really freaking awesome. Speaking of which, let's talk about your cohorts a little bit, because I think the last time we had you on, it was early pandemic. And then one of the things that sort of happened during the pandemic was the beautiful relationship that blossomed between you and Taz on Dark, which was so absolutely great. What has it been like working with Taz for as many years as you have now?
It's been great. Taz has become, at least in my opinion, a good friend. I don't know if you had him on here, what he would say, but I don't want to put words in his mouth. But to me, he's somebody that is not only a friend but a mentor as well. I mean, he's been calling wrestling and not just doing wrestling on TV, but I mean, he's also done drive time radio in New York. He's done all sorts of different media, and I mean, he's been in and around it for more than 20 years, and somebody that has a really great brain to, about all these things. He's got a lot of opinions, and sometimes you get Taz talking and he'll get on a bit of things will start to snowball, but at the core of
but I digress.
Is something that is, very, very beneficial, very, very informative. And so, yeah, it's, and the relationship that we had that kind of really blossomed on Dark, I don't think it would have been possible without the time we spent in Jacksonville, where we would be filming and Taz and I would be commentating Dark matches until 3:30 in the morning. And after commentating, 8 hours of wrestling in the cold while just, drinking nothing but Diet Cokes and Monster Energy drinks, you tend to get a little loopy. And that came out, and fans embraced that, and so I'm glad they did enjoy that. And for me, there were some very, very cold caffeinated nights, but for others, I've heard from actually quite a few people that they were part of the things that helped keep them entertained during the pandemic. And that's actually super meaningful to me, that something that I was a part of kept people busy, kept people sane, and kept people entertained.
Well, also on the team, and somebody who's had quite kind things to say about you, talking about Ian Riccaboni, who of course is voice of Ring of Honor. He's a voice that we try to get as often as we can when we're hitting the Northeast areas, but somebody that you've also had a great relationship with.
I mean, again, I don't want to put words in Taz's mouth. Ian says, that I'm a good friend. Ian's a true dirtbag, scum of the earth. No, Ian's somebody that it was all in. That was the first time that I met him, and the first time we worked together. And getting put on a live mic on a pay-per-view broadcast with somebody and just hoping that you have chemistry is not an easy thing to do, and it doesn't always happen. And Ian and I are both play-by-play guys, and it's tough because you as a play-by-play guy, you always want to take the lead. But I think when he and I work together, we have a good rhythm, and it's like playing with 2 point guards or two. It's not always the point guard that brings the ball up the court. Sometimes it's the power forward. Sometimes it's whoever. And so, we're able to recognize when to lay out, when to pass off to the other guy. And, Ian is, I think, a tremendous asset, not only for Ring of Honor, but for AEW. And I wish Ian would be around more than just when we're in the Northeast. But I understand that Ian, first and foremost is a dad, and his, the way he likes to be available for his family, kind of doesn't always get along with the AEW broadcast schedule. And I totally respect that. And I'm glad that he's in a position where he's happy with what he's able to contribute to not only AEW, but Ring of Honor as well. And so when we do get to have him, I think it's special. And I love having Ian around.
He's also just one of those guys that's like a good energy to have around, because I don't think I've ever seen him mad or frustrated. I don't know if he has the ability to be mad. If he does, he hides it really well.
He's got a very good poker face.
Ooh, good to know. I'm gonna now try to piss him off just to kind of see him break.
Oh, he says nasty things about you all the time.
I imagine that to be true. Okay, I got to start slipping him 20s when I'm in the ring. All right, we'll do that. So you had mentioned you primarily do play-by-play, and your play-by-play is fantastic. You have an encyclopedic knowledge of just wrestling moves, but then you also have, at a moment's notice, you're able to pull in all of these story moments that are happening to kind of keep the audience up to speed. What does preparation for specifically play-by-play commentary look like?
Well, so play-by-play is, the actual play-by-play part of it is very reactive. And so that's just being in the moment and kind of calling what you're seeing. And, for a very long time, for Pro Wrestling Guerrilla, I was play-by-play and color commentator. So I was handling both roles. And I sometimes have to, even though I've been doing AEW for 5+ years, still have to catch myself and realize that, oh no, I have Taz there, or I have Nigel or somebody else that's there to explain it as well. And, so for me though, the actual show prep, the storytelling aspect of it is something where, earlier the day or the night before, if I'm on the plane or whatever, I'll sit down and I write out my notes, but during the show, I don't typically refer to it. It's just more the act of writing it out makes it fresh in my mind. It brings it to the forefront, and it makes it a lot easier for me to recall. And, it's, for me, it's very easy to recall stuff that happened on Dynamite because I was there, I was speaking about it. But if I'm watching Collision and I see something, but, maybe I'm not, I'm not as immersed in it as I would be if I was in the arena at the desk on headset calling it. Sometimes it takes me a second. So that's when it's very helpful for me to actually go in, write out, just kind of my thoughts. And it's actually not even my thoughts. It's a recap kind of what happened just to make it fresh in my mind. And that's the majority of my show prep.
And so, kind of bringing it back to talking about the fact that, you've been calling Dynamite now for 5 years. What sort of things did you feel like you had to learn in the live TV aspect of things like traffic, things that you maybe didn't have before in your commentary experience?
The traffic is, that's kind of the inside baseball term for it, but that's what we call the countdowns to when interviews, to when we switch off to Renee or somebody else backstage that's conducting an interview. That's when we switch off to a video package. That's when we go to commercial break. And that's something that even with AEW, I'd called 3 shows. I'd called Double or Nothing, Fighter Fest, and Fight for the Fallen before the first episode of Dynamite aired. And those were essentially pay-per-views, and there's not a lot of traffic on pay-per-views. And also that was something where Jim Ross was the guy that was in the lead chair. And so he was doing a lot of the play calling. And so that was something just by being near him and watching hearing literally how he would throw to things. And like when we get a count in our ear that, okay, Renee's standing by, she'll be ready in 10, 9, 8, and how he would be able to wrap up his thoughts from the match at hand or from whatever the business at hand was, and then transition in 6 seconds to whatever, is going on backstage. That, is an art, and it's a very tough art to grasp. And I think, even 5 years in, I do an okay job at it. I think there's always room for improvement, and it's something that I strive to improve at with every single broadcast. And, it's little intangible things like that, I don't, if I'm good at it, then nobody notices, and that's the toughest thing is, going unseen or going unheard for something that the best thing that people can do is just take it for granted.
I literally just learned this term now. 5 years of live television. It's the first time I've ever heard that specific thing referred to as traffic. I had no idea. So thank you for that.
Yeah, I mean, it's the car coming down the road. You have to hold out the stop sign. You have to wave this guy through, and then you have to pick up traffic coming back the other way.
See, I forget because I did TV news 15 years ago, and it's just like a thing that I think when I say it, people know that, and then it's like, my bad.
I know the concept, just not the name. So, but
right.
now I feel more informed. I got something out of this podcast today. Thank you that
Well, that's it. That was an episode.
That's it. Well, actually, this is a good time for a commercial break. So we have much more to talk about here on AEW Unrestricted. Stay tuned.
AEW Unrestricted. It's Aubrey and Will with our guest, Excalibur, the voice of All Elite Wrestling, the voice of AEW Dynamite, the voice of Rampage, the voice of every pay-per-view we've done. I don't think you've missed a pay-per-view. Have you missed a pay-per-view?
I've not missed a pay-per-view.
I didn't think so, yeah.
So he's one of 4 people who have been on every single pay-per-view.
And like I said, it's incredible how much you've gotten to be a part of so many incredible, iconic AEW moments. And that's kind of what I wanted to talk to you about here. Because, again, we just celebrated 5 years of Dynamite. We've had an incredible streak of pay-per-views. There have been some awesome moments that have had Excalibur on the call. When you think about some of the greatest debuts in AEW history and the fact that you got to be the soundtrack to that. What are some of those? How do you prepare for those types of moments, for one? And then secondly, the other piece of that is, what were some of your favorites?
Preparation is very minimal. Oftentimes, we, even as broadcasters, don't know when somebody's debuting. We'll see backstage that there's a room that's labeled reserved for special guest, and
it's my favorite.
That could be a room that's reserved for Shad Khan, or that could be a room that's reserved for Mercedes Mone. And like with Mercedes, that was an interesting scenario because the entire event was branded around her. So we had a pretty good inkling that she would be there. But actually, funny enough, the most recent one was not the most recent. The most recent was Shelton Benjamin, but prior to that was MVP. And we didn't know that MVP would be coming out to interrupt Prince Nana. And the first thing that I think Taz and I both were doing simultaneously were radioing back to the truck saying, "Can we call him MVP?"
Right.
And so, sometimes that element of surprise that surprises the fans at home also catches us by surprise. And so I think, in those moments, you're getting a very, very genuine reaction out of us. And, that's something that is not always easy to get. There's a lot of things in not even just in professional wrestling, but, in sports, in entertainment that can have a tendency to feel manufactured. And, and I think our at the desk goal is to not, have things feel canned or manufactured, to be there and to share that excitement with the fans at home and, share that moment with them. And so I think that's a lot of time why us being surprised works so well, is that we don't know these things are coming. And when it does happen, we're caught up in it, just like the fans at home, hopefully, are, and the fans in the arena as well. And, we were talking about it just before we hit record, but I think still to this day, the most exciting for me triple whammy was at All Out when Minoru Suzuki was a surprise, Adam Cole was a surprise, and Bryan Danielson were a surprise. And two of those three guys I knew quite well.
Ruby Soho was one too that night.
Oh, that's true.
Yeah, that's true. I did not mean to discount that.
There's just so much going on that night. We forgot about it.
Yeah, it was a huge night for surprises, and it was. I think it was almost the case of, well, there can't possibly be one more, can there? Right. It kept going. So yeah, that was I think the most memorable, just out of sheer quantity, if nothing else.
Damn.
I was telling you before the show how, the call I remember the most, and I was in the arena live, so I hadn't even heard the call till I went back and watched it later. But literally, as Bryan Danielson has made his AEW debut, and the fans are yesing, and everybody's just excited, and as we go off the air, and you say AEW is the home of professional wrestling, and that felt so good as we faded to black. And that's a call that, to this day, I mean, we hear it in packages, we hear it in everything. That is a call that's so synonymous with AEW.
And it was a spur of the moment thing. It was just something that I had not intended on saying that, but it just felt right in the moment because, we had such a great roster at the time, and then to get that shot in the arm even kind of downplays the addition of talent that happened all on that one night. And it really, it felt good. It felt like, pro wrestling had come home, and the home was AEW. And that's not to say that it hadn't been before, but, having, if nothing else, the guy that many people looked at as not just the greatest wrestler of his generation, but perhaps one of the greatest wrestlers of all time, come to AEW in order to wrestle, in order to be a part of this pro wrestling company. That, I think, said a lot. And just in the actions of Danielson, and then so to be able to put a word to it, or put words to it, is very cool. And it was something that I think was I'm glad that it resonated with people, and I'm glad that it's still something that's being heard today.
So one of the things that is always really exciting is our Forbidden Door pay-per-view, because we always end up seeing new guests come through, and we have these new dream matches that no one ever thought was possible that is now just a regular thing for us, which is amazing. And you having also your encyclopedic knowledge of wrestling moves, you also seemingly have an encyclopedic knowledge of just all wrestling. So what is it like being involved in an event like Forbidden Door from your perspective as someone who is a fan of wrestling, but also someone who works in wrestling? And are there any particular moments that really stand out from any of the Forbidden Door shows?
Forbidden Door is a really cool event because prior to AEW, I'd done commentary for New Japan Pro Wrestling a couple times. And so I'd been, a longtime fan of New Japan, of a lot of the wrestlers there. And so to be able to call those shows prior to AEW was really cool, really rewarding for me. And, after I joined up with AEW, I thought, okay, well, that part of my life, or part of my career is over with. And so Forbidden Door gives me an opportunity to, call those wrestlers again. And it's not always easy. I mean, I think you don't get the level of knowledge of professional wrestling that I or anyone has without putting in the legwork for it. And so it does require a lot of research, a lot of hours spent watching, when, maybe, when you're a fan and you're consuming pro wrestling, that's something that you're doing, kind of for fun. But when your job is pro wrestling and your job is, almost a 7-day-a-week job, then, the last thing you might want to do is watch, some videos from Japan or from any other pro wrestling. Maybe you just want to watch a little Bake Off, and that's okay. But then you gotta make time for you got to make time for Destruction and Kobe as well. And so it's a balancing act. And I think the most memorable moment in Forbidden Door, it was not actually anything to do with a match itself. It was when the first time that Danielson came out to Final Countdown in AEW. I think that was at Forbidden Door in Toronto. And he's entering and he's doing, the entrance, the song is playing. And I didn't realize this at the time, but as it was going on, is I have an internal clock for that song because he used it on the indies for so many years. And I called so many of his matches in PWG where he used that song, that when that chorus kicks in, like, I know that's when the fans are going to shout. And so I'm doing this whole preamble that, talking about Danielson, talking about what this match means, blah, 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 blah. And while I'm doing that, everybody is screaming in my ear, just saying, shut up. You got to wait for the chorus. You got to wait for the chorus. And then Tony gets on. He's like, the chorus, the chorus, the chorus. And I just somehow was able to ignore, finish my thought. I finished my thought. And then you hear the crowd hit the Final Countdown. And then Tony gets my ear and goes, that was fucking great. And I said,
what's the best part too is I was sitting right next to Tony as that was all happening, and it's like to know it from two sides of it, because then I've watched it a million times. I've watched that entrance, and I agree that was such an incredible call. Your timing on it was impeccable. The way that you also threw in the Pistons references and all of that, like, it was all great. Everything worked out perfectly, because those that don't know, Excalibur is also a big basketball fan, and we'll talk about that here in a little bit. But the fact that it all played out so perfectly, and it all laid out perfectly. But also knowing how much that entrance meant to Tony and to make it happen, and how excited he was really all day long to make sure that this entrance went off without a hitch, that it was going to be perfect, that it was edited perfectly. Shout out, I think Mikey Ruckus did make the TV edit of it. And so to make sure that was all perfect, and everybody coming together to make that happen. So great. It's so great.
And I just, after it happened, and after he said, oh, that was fucking great, I just keyed back to him. I said, thank you for trusting me. That's all I said,
Yeah.
And no, but I mean, that's it. I legitimately meant that, because it's a high level of trust to put in one person, put in me, that, I am, for better, for worse, the soundtrack of the broadcast. And I could have very easily trampled what could have been a huge moment. And, I obviously would have been super disappointed in myself, but I would also let my boss down. And so, for him to put me in that chair, to put me in that position, it requires a lot of trust. And that's not something that I take for granted.
We avoided another Suzuki gate. So thank you for that.
What was that called? What did the internet dub that? Was the Suzuki incident?
Something or other. I don't know.
Something like that. It was a great time. It was one of my all-time favorite memes to come out of AEW. And so again, talking about some of the major calls you've gotten to make, and some of the education you have for talent. Again, it's interesting bringing those two things back around, because we talked about some of the debuts that have happened in AEW history, and some of the people you weren't even aware were coming out. But at the same time, you're almost immediately able to draw from that Excalibur brain and bring us the information that we need, bring fans that information of, you may not have known this person was coming. You get to give the initial shock, and then provide the audience with everything in that moment about that person. And that, I think, takes a really talented commentator to make happen.
Well, it's not something that was always there. I've mentioned it on a podcast before. I don't know if it was Unrestricted or elsewhere, but it's something that I had to learn the hard way, because was Dynamite 4 or 5, when the Butcher and Blade emerged from under the ring, And I was like, oh my God, it's the Butcher and the Blade. And Jim Ross goes, who are they? And what he meant was, explain who these guys are, explain what they're doing there. But I just kept repeating, it's the Butcher and the Blade, as if he didn't hear me. And it's something that I'm still embarrassed by, but it's something that I'm glad happened, because it taught me a very important lesson that, yeah, I know who the Butcher and the Blade are. JR didn't know who they were. A lot of people that were watching the television show, that was their first time seeing them. And so if I had been better prepared, or, you know, had an answer that was ready to go, it's like, oh, these guys are, you know, the most bloodthirsty mercenaries in all of pro wrestling. That's something that, you know, when these debuts happen, there's the initial shock, but then I have to think about, like, okay, how am I going to explain this person?
Yeah. Wow. Just, I'm going to go back and watch that now. It's freaking great, man. Because I'm just sitting there like, wait, how did we build a hole into the ring? Like, there were so many questions I already had in that moment. It was great. This fantastic conversation. I'm learning so much. I love hearing just the different perspective for someone who's been around for so long. We've got a little bit more coming up here on AEW Unrestricted, but first up, a quick break.
Unrestricted.
AEW Unrestricted, Aubrey, Will, Excalibur. It's been 5 years of Dynamite, and we've heard a lot of Excalibur's voice. He is the voice behind Dynamite, the soundtrack of AEW, and I'm so excited that we have him back for a second time on AEW Unrestricted. So one of the things that I always wonder on pay-per-view day is, when do you get a break? Because that's oftentimes 6 hours of wrestling. And, like, no one can have a bladder that strong. So what's the secret?
Willpower. No, we don't typically get breaks. You know, it's just something that you just got to deal with. You gotta persevere. And, you know, it's like being, you know, those flights where the seats are 5 across. It's like being in that middle seat for 6 hours, and, you know, you just can't get up, and you can't use the restroom. So you just gotta, you know, you gotta focus. Yeah, it's a lot of Zen, a lot of clenching. I don't know what the male version of Kegels is, but it's a lot of that. Yeah, it's, you know, it's not something that really bugs me until the end of the night, when, you know, it's like when you're getting close to the finish line. I think, you know, never having run a marathon, I can't attest to this, but if you're 15 miles into the marathon, you're not really thinking about the finish line. You're just thinking one foot in front of the other.
Right.
But, you know, when you're 22 miles into the marathon, you're like, all right, I know I'm getting close. And usually about when the main event gets in the ring, I'm like, all right, let's, but routinely the main event ends up being the longest match of the night.
Right. Oh my God. So for you to be calling the matches you are as excellently as you are, knowing that you're in that physical state, I have even more respect for you now than I already did.
Well, thank you. You know, and the funny thing is, people ask me, it's like, well, you just must stop drinking water or drinking anything at like 2 p.m. But it's speaking that much, you're expelling so much moisture from your mouth, from your body. And then plus you're sweating, you know, when you're in a suit, under a mask, in an arena, under the lights, and, you know, you're constantly, your body is perspiring. So you're constantly, I think really that's what benefits me. I mean, having never really thought about the physiological aspects, is that the amount that I drink during a pay-per-view is actually just keeping myself level. It's not, it's not filling everything up too much. At least I hope. I don't know.
The same amount in is the same amount out, kind of thing.
Exactly.
We don't disturb the balance.
Yeah.
And the other side of that too is it has to increase tenfold wearing a mask through it all.
Yeah.
It does. Yeah. It's there was only one time that it get really, really shaky was, I think it was Double or Nothing. It was definitely it was in Jacksonville. I think it was in one of the Double or Nothings where it was so humid and so hot that even though I was sweating, you know, my body wasn't cooling down. And it was right as the main event started to get in the ring, I started to get lightheaded.
Oh no.
And so I had to go off, you know, off camera and like pull off my mask and, you know, just take like a big deep breath. And then what I ended up doing was just took a bunch of ice cubes and put them in my mask and put my mask back on and jumped in for the main event. And I don't know, I can't remember which show it is off the top of my head, but on air, JR turns to me, he's like, "You all right, kid?" And yeah, I got it. And like we had this like weird.
Was that
like,
All In or All Out that year? The one that was like super hot.
It might have been, yeah. It might have been. And I had him. It was the first time I had worn that mask, and what I had realized is like because of all like the sequins and stuff on it, the heat and the moisture couldn't escape as effectively, and so. You know, there's masks that I wear when I know I'll only be calling wrestling for 2 hours. And then there's masks that I wear when I know I'll be calling wrestling for 6 hours.
Is that something that you specifically like go to your mask maker for? Like, hey, I need like a long wear mask for this one. Use these sort of materials, like have it be something that I can wear for, 5+ hours.
No, I mean, usually my request all the time, I mean, having learned from that experience is just, it needs to be breathable. It just needs to be comfortable for 5 hours. And so that was, that's my number one request above all else. And then everything else is kind of dealer's choice.
Damn. Oh, didn't even think about that. So I want to talk about Bola in January of 2023, because this is sort of one of the things that makes AEW great is that our people can kind of show up anywhere. And just to kind of set the scene, like Chris Jericho and the Jericho Appreciation Society.
You're talking about, right, this is my broadcaster mind kicking in. You're talking about Pro Wrestling Guerrillas 2023 Battle of Los Angeles.
Correct. Yes. Thank you for saying the full name correctly, just so we could make sure that we got the branding right. PWG Battle of Los Angeles.
The way we should have done that is, what's Bola? And then that's when you...
Right? And he goes, it's Bola. Anyway, to set the scene, Jericho and the Jericho Appreciation Society had shown up the night before as like a huge just surprise for the audience. And then the next night, on night 2, they had a match. It was a tag match with, Evil Uno, Jonathan Gresham, Kevin Blackwood, Michael Oku. There was someone else in there that I'm forgetting. SB
Kento.
SB Kento, yeah.
Not to correct you, but they had shown up just they'd only shown up on night 2. There was no indication on night 1 that would happen. So basically, Battle of Los Angeles is a 2-night, sometimes 3 tournament, knockout elimination tournament in Pro Wrestling Guerrilla. That on the second night, before the final round match goes into the ring, there is a multi-person match with all the people that were eliminated from the tournament on night 1.
It's one of the best matches of the entire weekend.
I would say it's one of the most unique and fun matches. It's and a lot of surprises. A couple of years ago, this is more than a decade ago, Jushin Thunder Liger was in it. The clips are all over YouTube. If you just look up Liger, Bola, and
really quick, just for anybody who's not aware of your direct connection to PWG, and kind of elaborating on that.
So I'm one of the co-founders of Pro Wrestling Guerrilla. It began in 2003, July of 2003. It was basically the biggest independent promotion on the West Coast, and it's where a lot of people, like the Young Bucks, Scorpio Sky, really kind of rose to prominence on a national level. And it's also where guys like Will Ospreay, Zack Sabre Jr., it was really kind of the first time that they had a chance to break out in the United States. Kenny Omega was our world champion. Bryan Danielson was world champion for us. Claudio Castagnoli was world champion for us. So there's kind of been a who's who of professional wrestling that has come through Pro Wrestling Guerrilla through the years. And for a long time, it was the only alternative, or not the only alternative, but it was part of the alternative of professional wrestling. And it was a style of professional wrestling that was not represented on television, where now the style that PWG kind of, pioneered or elevated is ubiquitous, in professional wrestling. I mean, we just saw Will Ospreay and Ricochet have essentially what was a PWG match on free TV or, on cable TV. So long story long, the big 10-person match at Battle of Los Angeles Night 2 in 2023, all the guys that were eliminated on the first night, they come out, and everybody's waiting to see who comes out first. And I think it was Daddy Magic and Cool Hand. And they come out first, and first Judas starts playing. And then Daddy Magic and Cool Hand come out. Then Jake Hager comes out. then Sammy, Ty, and Anna Jay come out. And then finally, and everybody's like, in my position is I'm right by the curtain, but I can see the fans that are sitting there ringside, and people are just slowly losing their mind as they're realizing what's about to happen. And then finally, everybody's looking at the curtain, and as the true showman that he is, he takes a beat, takes an extra beat, takes a third beat, and then finally Jericho comes through the curtain and the place erupts. And it was a thing that, no one had expected to happen, but because of PWG, or because of AEW and its roots in, not only places like Ring of Honor, but places like Pro Wrestling Guerrilla, is the thing that was still allowed to happen. And the genesis of it, which I don't know if you guys can see this, but
Chris Jericho.
This text was
a text from him.
2:27 in the morning. Chris Jericho just said, "I want to work PWG." And
I like that you took a screenshot of it.
Because it was so ridiculous, and I just said,
thought?
I mean, I was looking not just at the timestamp of that, but the date. That was months in advance.
Mm-hmm,
that was quite some time prior.
Yeah, it was actually almost
like 8 months,
9 months in advance.
Yeah,
and so it was. He kept on talking about it, and I was like, "Oh, come on, Chris, you're full of shit. That's never gonna happen. Never gonna happen." And then as it got closer, or as time went on, Chris was like, "No, I'm serious. I really want to do this." And I said, "Well, okay. I mean, here's this thing that we do on this tournament." And he's like, "That's perfect. We're gonna do it." And so we had the backstage at the Globe Theater in LA is not very large, and so what Chris did is he actually rented a party bus that went in the alley behind the Globe, and he used that as their locker room. And so those guys were all changing in there. And then I remember I saw Michael Oku in the afternoon, and I said, "Are you ready for tonight?" And he's like, "Yeah, I'm not even sure what I'm doing." I'm like, "Oh, you're wrestling Chris Jericho." He's like, "Yeah, whatever." And I'm like, "Oh, no, you're wrestling Chris Jericho." And like his face just dropped. And then, he, at the end of the night, I was like, "Hey, how was it? You wrestled Chris Jericho." And all he could do was just, "Man, I wrestled Chris Jericho."
Such a good kid.
Yeah. And so it was a really cool moment, but it wouldn't be possible without AEW. I mean, without Tony being so cool at things like this, but also too, Chris Jericho being so cool about things like this, because he had said that, it had been 25 years since he had wrestled in front of a crowd that size. And the thing was that on that night, and, as is commonplace with PWG, the size of the crowd belies, or I guess the noise of the crowd belies the size of the crowd, because they're routinely so enthusiastic and so loud that you would think there's twice as many people in the building. And Chris, Chris had said as much. He's like, I couldn't believe it when he walked through the curtain, or he said that he couldn't believe it when he walked through the curtain, how loud and how intense that was.
Well, and it's like, because the Globe Theater is such a beautiful building, and because there's multiple stories, so you have all of this noise just kind of funneling down towards the ring. It's an absolutely incredible spot. And like,
it's a concert venue, and
right.
it's not a typical wrestling venue. Yeah. So it's all the energy is coming toward the stage, and the stage happens to be where the ring is set up.
Who would have thought 10 years ago you would see Chris Jericho at one of the premier independent organizations in wrestling? Like, and
he continues to do it time after time. He popped up
right.
in Rev Pro in the UK. He's going down to CMLL. I mean, Jericho is, he's somebody that eats, lives, sleeps, and breathes professional wrestling. And, he's somebody that wants to leave the business better than when he found it,
And I think he's doing that. And before we,
and I think also that really speaks to a large part of the philosophy of AEW, and a lot of the veterans that we have here are here. Not, it's there's the MLS, the Major League Soccer, often gets knocked as the retirement league for European players, and there, if you were crass, you could say that about AEW, but that, being there day in and day out, that's definitely not the case. It's a place where these people are coming to AEW because they feel like they have more to give to professional wrestling. They have more to give to the next generation of professional wrestling. And just like the MLS has grown up and is no longer really a retirement league, AEW, I mean, not to say that it ever was, but it is really just showing it time and time again. When we add these people to our roster, it's not, they're not just there to collect a paycheck. They're there to play a meaningful role. They're there to impart knowledge on the next generation of pro wrestling. And that's something that's really cool to see on a firsthand basis, not only backstage, but on screen as well.
So before we go, I have one more question. And we did just celebrate the 5-year anniversary of Dynamite. So congrats to you both. We did just lock in a new TV deal. Congrats to you both. It's
congrats
a testament
to us all.
Congrats to us all. That was one of the best things about that day, is everybody's walking around saying, congratulations, happy birthday. Like, it was such a fun day, filled with so much stuff. But that being said, it's been 5 years. We've all grown and changed quite a bit and become completely different people, regardless of how long you've been in wrestling prior to AEW starting. So what would you say is the biggest difference with Excalibur at the 5-year mark now compared to when you first started? And what do you want to see for Excalibur in the next 5 years?
I think 5 years ago, I was just kind of reacting. I just kind of being like, oh shit, I'm between Jim Ross and Tony Schiavone. I hope I don't screw up. I hope I don't make myself look bad. I hope I don't make the company look bad. And, because it was the early days of AEW and people were still, they still, every time somebody tunes in, it's a judgment that they're making on whether I want to continue to watch this, whether it's a TV show or a scripted television show, whether it's pro wrestling, no matter what it is. And so, that part of me that was very nervous is now replaced by more intentionality, where I go in there saying like, okay, I want to do these are my goals during this broadcast. I want to sell this pay-per-view. I want to get people to tune in next week, but I also want to enhance these stories that are playing out on our program. I want to give people a chance to get to know these athletes and who they are and what motivates them and things like that. And that was something that maybe I was doing at the time, but it wasn't necessarily conscious, whereas today it's more conscious. And I think if I'm lucky enough to be in this, position 5 years from now, I think where I would like to be in 10 years of AEW is helping develop the next generation of voices of AEW, and whoever could, taking the knowledge that I've gained from JR, from Taz, Schiavone, from Nigel, from Ian, from Caprice, from everybody that I get a chance to work with on air, taking all that knowledge, distilling it down and passing those lessons along to whoever the next generation is. I think that is something that would be super rewarding, something that I hope I get the chance to do.
I hope it's something you get the chance to do as well, especially considering since the last time you were here on this show, and it is an important point to note, you're a three-time Announcer of the Year winner. And that, I think, is a strong testament to what you have brought to commentary on all scales of professional wrestling, and particularly on AEW TV. And we thank you for doing that for these last 5 years, and thank you for being a part of the show today.
No, thank you guys. And Will, I'm glad, Justin Roberts couldn't be here today, but he perpetually reminds me about that, and much to my chagrin. So I'm glad you were able to do it as well.
Oh,
absolutely.
Wonderful.
There was no way I was going to let that get by here. Folks, keep checking out new episodes of AEW Unrestricted. It's available on all of your favorite podcast platforms. You can get it on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts. And you can check out video episodes of this show every Monday, available on our YouTube channel, AEW Unrestricted. Just do a search for that and hit that subscribe button so you never miss an episode. And catch up on all the latest AEW shows on the go when you download the TNT and TBS apps from the App Store and Google Play. Then sign up for our weekly newsletter at tntdrama.com/elitefleet to get updates on upcoming shows, live events, sweepstakes, merchandise, and more. AEW Dynamite on TBS Wednesdays at 8 p.m. AEW Rampage on Friday, TNT, 10 p.m. AEW Collision live every Saturday on TNT. And, of course, watch ROH.com for the latest ROH shows every Thursday on Honor Club. I'm Will Washington. That's Aubrey Edwards. For our guest, Excalibur. We'll see you next time. Have a great day. Peace.